Hi, I'm Nathan from Serious Geeks, and in this video I'm going to discuss the new rules for the C'tan Nightbringer as shown in Codex Necrons 9th edition. What is always a good point of reference to start with is the stat line, and as you can see, the stat line on the Nightbringer is superior to that of either the Deceiver or the Void Dragon. As is consistent with the other C'tan, this model has movement of 8. It also has a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 2+, which is kind of what you would expect for a model that costs 350 points. The wound value is 9, which is very consistent with the other C'tan, and the leadership is 10, which is fairly consistent with most models of this sort of value. This model does also have a 4+ save, which is okay. It's not massively brilliant, but it does give you the option to have a benefit of cover that might give it a bonus, or whatever rules in the future that we might see. However, you're unlikely to be using its 4+ save, and I will explain in due course. The last of the stats that it keeps in line with its brothers is a toughness of 7. Where the Nightbringer is markedly superior in its stat line is its strength value of 7 and its attack value of 6. One of each doesn't really seem to be much of a big deal, but when you combine it with the actual weaponry of the Nightbringer, you can see that this makes a massive impact on its actual ability to put out damage. So at this point, we may as well move on to the weapons. He has just the one, the Scythe of the Nightbringer, which kind of makes sense. Before you select your targets, you select one of the profiles to attack with. The Reaping Sweep is a melee attack that has AP -3 and 1 damage, and it uses the base strength of the user, which is 7. And each attack that is made with a profile makes 2 hit rolls instead of 1. This means that instead of having just basically 6 attacks, it has 12. If your opponent tries to tie up the Nightbringer in close combat and slow it down, you can use this version of the weapon to just cut through a horde of models. 12 attacks, hitting on 2, wounding on 3s or 2s depending on the models, and allowing no save the majority of the time. The other version of this weapon is the Entropic Blow. Again, this version can only be used in melee, but what it does provide is strength ×2, which would go up to 14 for the Nightbringer. It has a -4 AP, which will cut through all power armor, and it does D6 damage. What makes this especially dangerous is invulnerable saves cannot be made against its attacks. With an AP of -4, many elite units that get hit with this version of the weapon, Entropic Blow, will basically have no defense. It will cut right through their armor, and they'll end up having no invulnerable save and needing to rely on 2+s moving to a 6+. Characters are especially worried about this because 6 attacks is fairly lethal for a single character to take on. And small elite units are going to be card through quite readily as well. There is obviously a little bit of swing with the D6 damage, but I think most people will accept that with the fact that this weapon is so unbelievably powerful. Linked to these attacks is the Drain Life special rule. This is where the Nightbringer gets really scary. Each time this model makes a melee attack that is allocated to an enemy model, that enemy model cannot use any rules to ignore the wounds it loses. Games Workshop have already FAQ'd this, and they have explained that models like Ghazghkull that have a limit on how many wounds they can suffer in each phase are affected by Drain Life. This means that this model is incredibly good at killing these high value targets that are really difficult to put down in one phase or one turn of the game. This will also include other C'tan shards and any future models that might have this ability. So the Nightbringer, with that stat line, the Drain Life ability, and his weaponry, is incredibly potent. If you look at the fact that he has a movement of 8, he's going to be able to reach most of his targets, at least by turn 2, if he rushes up the table. And you might think, well, he's going to get shot, he's going to get destroyed if he does so. Well, that is where his next load of special rules come in handy. In common with other C'tan shards, he has a Necrodermis, which provides him a 4+ invulnerable save. In addition, it also means that he can lose no more than 3 wounds in any one phase of the game. So this basically prevents him from getting shot off the table within 2 turns. It has to be a minimum of 3 turns. Added to this, he also has Living Metal, which provides an extra wound healing every turn. And you can see that the C'tan Nightbringer is going to be very difficult to put down. He's going to make it to where he needs to be most of the time. If you want to bring him down, you're going to have to use multiple phases in any one game, because you just can't rely on one phase to be able to wipe him out. He can fly, which means that he's going to be able to reach you no matter where you go, and he has a really decent movement stat. So that combined with his killing ability means that this is a high priority target for a lot of people, and yet they can't even wipe it off the table with just shooting alone, at least not without a dedicated amount of firepower going in for multiple turns. What is perhaps a little bit reassuring is that he has the Enslaved Star God rule, which limits his ability to take a relic or a warlord trait, which would be totally broken if he could, and he also doesn't benefit from the Lookout Sir rule. Makes sense, because let's be honest, the game would be completely broken if he did. If he does finally cop it, on a 4+, every unit within 6 inches suffers D3 mortal wounds. Kind of what you'd expect. It always used to have that rule anyway, and it's nice to see it back. The very last facet of this model are the powers of the C'tan. As could be expected, it always knows the Gaze of Death power, but it also can use one other C'tan power each turn, and it has to choose that at the beginning of the game. If we start with the latter, we can choose between any of the 6 powers. I'd probably go for either Antimatter, Meteor or Transdimensional Thunderbolt, 1 and 6 respectively. The reason I've chosen these are for their consistency. Antimatter Meteor on a 3+ will do 3 mortal wounds to the closest visible enemy unit within 24 inches. If you roll a 6 for this roll, you'll score D3 plus 3 wounds. It is limited in that you can only choose the closest enemy unit to suffer this damage, but it's very consistent and very powerful. Transdimensional Thunderbolt is very useful in that you can choose the target. Obviously you can't choose a character unless it's the closest enemy unit or its wounds value is above 9, but you can choose any other unit, so a vehicle or a squad that needs to suffer D3 mortal wounds. On a 2+, it does. Once you've done that, every enemy unit within 3 inches on a 4+ will suffer an additional 1 mortal wound. I lean towards Transdimensional Thunderbolt because you can choose the unit that you want to take the D3 mortal wounds, and also if the unit is amongst a load of its peers, you can do a little bit of damage to all of them on a 4+, which is quite good over the course of a few turns. Lastly, the last power, Gaze of Death, is unbelievable. It works by selecting a single enemy unit within 9 inches and visible to the Nightbringer. Roll 3d6. For each 4-up, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. It's very possible to do 9 mortal wounds to a single target using this ability, although consistently that's unlikely to happen. On average, you should get at least 1 4-up, which means you'll do D3 mortal wounds to a single target, and it won't be completely out the realms of possibility to get 2 4-ups when you do it, and therefore you get 2 D3 mortal wounds, which you can add to the fact that you're using Transdimensional Thunderbolt on the same target, potentially, and you're going to be doing a lot of damage, and that is just with your powers of the C'tan. Let's not forget, there is a stratagem called Dimensional Destabilization, which allows the Nightbringer, or any other C'tan shard, to roll 1d6, and that model can immediately use the corresponding power from the powers of the C'tan. This means that even if it's already been used that turn, it can use this power for free, and it only costs 1 command point. So essentially your Nightbringer can use 3 mortal wound causing powers in 1 turn, every turn until it's dead. As you can see, the killing potential of this model is immense. Anything in close combat will likely die, and its mortal wound output is unbelievably high, which kind of makes sense for a creature that is literally the echoes of a star god. So how would I use this model in my army? Well, it is an expensive model. 350 points is not to be sniffed at. However, it should be able to earn its keep. Scorpec destroyers fit the bill very nicely because they have the same movement characteristic, and also scarabs, which are cheap and can get in front of this model and take any mortal wounds that may come at it in the psychic phase. What targets would I send this up against? Probably elite units as a matter of course. It will absolutely carve through elite units, but it could also do a lot of damage to smaller units as well. So pretty much anything that needs to die can be this unit's target. Things to watch out for are armies that can cause mortal wounds in multiple phases, not just the shooting phase. So we all know that the shooting phase can be lethal in Warhammer 40,000, but the limit on 3 wounds per phase does protect this model quite a lot. The psychic phase is actually quite suitably the most dangerous vulnerability to this model. We all know that the shooting phase is going to put wounds on it, but the psychic phase is another phase in which mortal wound damage can come up against another model, and some armies are very good at generating them. Thousand Suns and Eldari in particular will be very dangerous against the Nightbringer, and also Death Guard. These sort of armies have a lot of way of causing damage outside the shooting phase, and that means that this model, the Nightbringer, can go down quite quickly in only a matter of a couple of turns, and when you've invested 350 points in a model, that's going to hurt. It's for that reason surrounding this model with scarabs could be an essential way of keeping it alive. Any smites that may be directed at the Nightbringer are much better at being intercepted by scarabs. We all know that, so take scarabs with this model and you can have a nice little escort, at least for a limited amount of time, while you get your model into close combat and doing some damage, scoring points up and down the board. Lastly, don't think that this model is immune to getting killed in the assault phase just because it's such a dangerous model. Remember, the Nightbringer will only be healed 1 wound from the living metal rule in your command phase. This means there is an element of vulnerability here. It's very possible to lose wounds whilst in melee yourself, and then in the opponent's assault phase, they can deal melee damage to you as well, which would be 2 separate phases to suffer up to 6 wounds. It doesn't mean you have to be completely terrified of the assault phase, but you should bear it in mind, especially if you're fighting some really dangerous opponents that have access to psychic powers as well. Ultimately, the Nightbringer seems to me to be one of the most powerful units in the entire game right now. The mortal wound output plus its close combat capacity, the fact that it has the drain life skill and can ignore invulnerable saves, means that there is almost nothing that is safe from this model. If you play competitively, prepare to take it on. It's very likely that you will face one in a tournament situation, and this means you need models that can do wounds outside the shooting or the assault phase, as a matter of course, to try and stack up as much damage as possible. Overall, this is one of my favourite models of all time, and I'm really happy to see it get the rules it deserves. So, on that note, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Please like and subscribe and try and grow the channel even more, and I will catch you all soon. Peace out.